Meet Helen, 64 years old, good appetite, slept through the night, never choked, never gagged. Her family called her the picture of health. Then her doctor found something on a routine chest x-ray. Quiet, creeping lung damage. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just silently chips away. Here's what stopped me cold. Helen never choked on her food, never gagged, never once felt something go down the wrong way. And yet for months, possibly longer, small amounts of what she swallowed were slipping past her airway, trickling into her lungs. While she slept, while she sat at dinner, while she sipped her morning coffee. Her lungs were being damaged by something she couldn't feel, couldn't see, and had absolutely no idea was happening. And here's what you need to hear right now. Helen's story is not rare. Research from the NIH suggests that 1 in 4 seniors over 60 may be experiencing this exact condition, silently, invisibly, right now. 0 obvious warning signs. The medical term is silent aspiration, and what makes it so dangerous is exactly what the name says, the silence. I'm Dr. Derek. I've spent years studying aging, respiratory health, and what the medical literature actually tells us about how the body changes after 60. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you a 30-second exercise researchers have found can significantly reduce this risk, starting tonight. I'll also name the one mealtime habit millions of seniors do every day that makes this dramatically worse. But first, you need to understand exactly what's happening inside the body, because once you see it, everything else clicks. Before we go further, I want to acknowledge something. If you're over 60 or caring for someone who is, you've probably already noticed changes around eating and swallowing. Food that feels like it sits a little longer in the throat, a subtle urge to clear your throat after meals, thin liquids, water, juice, that feel slightly different than they did 10 years ago. And if you mentioned any of this to a doctor, you almost certainly heard some version of this. That's just a normal part of getting older. I understand why that answer feels reasonable. The body slows down with age. Muscles lose strength. Reflexes take longer. So why wouldn't swallowing change too? For years, that was the accepted wisdom, even inside medicine. Swallowing slows down a little. Things feel different. Nothing to worry about unless someone is visibly choking. So millions of seniors, sharp, active, otherwise healthy, were sent home. No monitoring, no follow-up, just a quiet reassurance. But here's what the research actually shows. Yes, swallowing changes with age. That part is true. But there is a critical difference between normal age-related changes and a silent process that is actively directing food, liquid, and oral bacteria straight into the lungs, with no cough, no gag, no warning. That difference is being missed every single day. Here's why it's so hard to catch. The very reflex that should protect you, the cough reflex, becomes blunted with age. So instead of coughing when something enters the airway, the body simply doesn't react. The material slips through, the lungs absorb it quietly. Damage accumulates over weeks, months, sometimes years, before a single symptom appears. That is not just aging. That is a specific, identifiable, and in many cases manageable process. And you deserve to understand exactly how it works. Here's what most people expect me to say next. Swallowing is complicated. And technically, yes, it involves over 30 muscles firing in precise coordination. But forget the anatomy textbook. Picture this instead. A busy highway intersection, 2 lanes of traffic, 1 officer in the middle whose entire job is making sure nothing crosses into the wrong lane. That officer is your swallowing reflex. For most of your life, it worked perfectly. Food and liquid went one way, down to the stomach. Air went the other, down to the lungs. Clean, automatic, every time. But here's where it gets interesting. Research in the journals of gerontology found that the small muscles responsible for lifting and protecting the airway during swallowing gradually lose mass and strength with age. Not dramatically, not visibly, but measurably, quietly, year by year. That officer is still showing up to work. But they're a little slower. And occasionally, just occasionally, 1 car slips through the wrong lane. That car is a tiny amount of food, liquid, or saliva. That wrong lane is your airway. That destination is your lungs. Now here's the piece almost nobody connects. NIH researchers scanning the lungs of healthy older adults. No known lung disease, no symptoms, no complaints. Found subtle tissue changes already accumulating in those who were silently aspirating. The lungs were reacting. The body just wasn't sending a loud enough alarm. Why no cough? Why no gag? This is the part that stops people. In a younger person, even a tiny drop of liquid near the airway triggers an immediate, forceful cough. The body ejects it. Crisis over. In many adults over 60, that trigger threshold rises. The material enters the airway, and the body stays quiet. No cough, no gag, no sensation of anything wrong. That's why the medical literature calls it silent aspiration. Not because it's rare, because it leaves no fingerprints. And here's the final layer, the one that makes this a nighttime problem. Saliva production continues while we sleep. For anyone whose swallowing muscles have weakened even slightly, small amounts of saliva, carrying oral bacteria, can slip into the airway overnight, completely undetected. That bacteria settles into the lungs, and over time it creates the exact conditions researchers link to aspiration-related lung inflammation and pneumonia, the #1 infectious cause of death in adults over 60. Not from one dramatic event, from a slow, silent, nightly process most people never knew to look for. Let's bring this together, because I want this next part to land clearly. If you clear your throat more often after meals than you used to, if you've had a recurring mild cough that seems to come from nowhere, if you or someone you love has had more than one bout of chest congestion, bronchitis, or pneumonia in the last few years without a clear explanation, there is a possibility nobody has raised with you yet. It may not be allergies. It may not be a weak immune system. It may not simply be your age. It may be that your airway's natural gatekeeper has quietly lost its timing, and small amounts of food, liquid, or saliva have been finding their way into your lungs, regularly, without a single obvious warning sign. Now, I want to be very clear about something. That is not a frightening conclusion. It is actually an empowering one, because here is what the research tells us. Silent aspiration, caught early, is one of the most manageable age-related changes in the human body. The swallowing muscles respond to targeted exercise. Oral hygiene can dramatically reduce the bacterial load reaching the lungs. Simple positional adjustments at meals can change the physics of how food and liquid move through the throat entirely. No complicated interventions, specific, practical, evidence-backed habits. And we're going to walk through them together in just a moment. But first, one more thing, because it reframes this entire conversation. For decades, aspiration pneumonia in older adults was treated as something that just happened, arrived without warning, managed after the fact. What current research from the NIH and swallowing science now shows us is this. For a significant number of seniors, aspiration pneumonia is not an unpredictable event. It is the final, visible result of a long, silent, preventable process. A process that started at the dinner table, during sleep, during a quiet Tuesday morning with a cup of tea. It went undetected not because of negligence, but because nobody told these patients, sharp, engaged, health-conscious people, what to actually look for. Helen didn't know. And statistically, 1 in 4 seniors over 70 right now doesn't know either. But you do now. And that changes everything about what comes next. Let's go back to Helen. When I first told you her story, you just knew something was quietly damaging her lungs with zero warning signs. You probably thought, how is that even possible? She seemed perfectly fine. Now you know exactly how it happened. Her swallowing muscles had weakened gradually. Not enough to cause obvious choking, not enough to trigger a cough, just enough to let small amounts of liquid and saliva slip silently past her airway, most often at night while she slept, carrying bacteria directly into her lung tissue. Night after night, meal after meal, quietly, invisibly. And because her cough reflex had also dulled with age, her body never sounded the alarm. She woke up every morning feeling rested, ate with a healthy appetite, had absolutely no idea. When I walked Helen through what the evidence showed, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I haven't forgotten. I kept thinking the chest congestion was just from getting older. My mother had it too. I thought it was just what happened. That is the heart of this entire conversation. Helen wasn't wrong to think that. She'd been given no other framework. No one had ever connected her recurring respiratory symptoms to what was happening at her dinner table or on her pillow every night. Here's what changed. Working with her physician, Helen began 3 simple practices. A short daily swallowing exercise, under 5 minutes, targeting exactly the muscles the research identifies as most critical. 1 specific head position adjustment during meals that changes the angle of the airway. And 1 targeted upgrade to her nighttime oral hygiene that dramatically reduced the bacterial load in her saliva before sleep. That was it. No surgery. No specialist procedures, no dramatic lifestyle overhaul. Within 6 weeks, her recurring chest congestion had noticeably improved. Within 4 months, her follow-up chest imaging showed the subtle lung changes were no longer progressing. Her doctor used one word in that appointment, a word Helen told me she replayed in her mind for days. Stable. Her lungs were stable. She called her daughter that evening. She said, "I finally feel like I'm actually doing something about it instead of just waiting to get worse." That sense of agency, that feeling of finally having the right information at the right time, that is exactly what this is about. And in just a moment, I'm going to give you those same 3 practices in plain language, starting with one thing you can do tonight before you go to sleep. All right, let's get practical. Everything we've covered, the weakening muscles, the blunted cough reflex, the silent nighttime process, all of it points to something genuinely hopeful. These are specific, targetable problems, and the research gives us specific, targetable solutions. 3 practices, simple, senior-friendly, everyone grounded in the science we've been discussing. Practice 1, the chin tuck, the single most well-documented positional adjustment in swallowing research. 0 equipment, 0 cost, 2 seconds to learn. When you sit down to eat or drink, especially thin liquids like water, broth, or juice, instead of tilting your head back as most people naturally do, gently lower your chin toward your chest before you swallow. Small, gentle, deliberate. What this does mechanically, it narrows the entrance to the airway and widens the passage to the esophagus. It gives food and liquid a better angled path away from the lungs. Studies on swallowing mechanics in older adults confirm this simple adjustment meaningfully reduces misdirected swallowing, particularly with thin liquids. Do it every time you drink. Make it as automatic as picking up the glass. Practice 2, the effortful swallow. Here's something remarkable. The muscles protecting your airway during swallowing, the same ones that weaken with age, respond to exercise, just like any other muscle in your body. Once a day, swallow your own saliva, but do it with deliberate, conscious effort. Squeeze every muscle in your throat as hard as you comfortably can. Hold for a full 2 seconds. Release. 10 repetitions, under 3 minutes. That's your set. Researchers studying swallowing strength in older adults found that consistent, targeted exercise measurably improves the speed and coordination of the swallowing reflex over time. You are sending a daily maintenance signal to muscles that aging quietly neglects. Practice 3, the nighttime oral rinse. Do this tonight. Remember what we said about saliva carrying bacteria into the lungs during sleep? This is where your most immediate protective action lives. Evidence-based aspiration risk protocols consistently highlight one intervention above almost all others: oral hygiene before bed. Not just brushing, a full routine. Brush thoroughly, clean between teeth, then rinse with antimicrobial mouthwash for a full 30 seconds before you lie down. This dramatically reduces the bacterial load in your saliva before sleep. So even if small amounts slip past the airway overnight, they carry significantly less of the harmful bacteria that trigger aspiration-related lung inflammation. 30 seconds, tonight, before bed. 3 practices, 1 positional habit at every meal, 1 3-minute daily exercise, 1 30-second nighttime routine. A genuinely protective protocol built entirely from what the research shows actually works. Remember how we started today? Helen, 64 years old, healthy appetite, sleeping through the night, no choking, no gagging, no obvious signs of anything wrong. And yet, quietly, invisibly, her lungs were paying a price that nobody had connected to her dinner table, her pillow, or the cup of tea she sipped every morning without a second thought. When I first told you her story, it may have felt unsettling, something happening without warning, to someone doing everything right. But now you see it completely differently. You understand that her swallowing muscles weakened gradually, not dramatically, just enough. Her cough reflex lost some sensitivity, not completely, just enough. And every night, while she slept peacefully, a slow and silent process unfolded that her body had no reliable way to announce. And most importantly, once she had the right information, the trajectory changed entirely. Not because of surgery, not because of an expensive specialist, but because 3 simple, research-backed practices gave her body what it needed to start protecting itself again. Her lungs stabilized, her congestion cleared, and she told me something in one of our last conversations that I want you to hear directly. I spent years feeling like my body was slowly becoming something I didn't recognize. Now I feel like I'm working with it again, instead of just watching it change. That is what this is really about. Not just lung health, Not just swallowing mechanics, but the feeling of agency over your own body. The confidence that comes from finally understanding what's happening inside you and knowing you have something real, something evidence-based, something you can actually do about it. You are not at the mercy of aging. Your body is adaptive, resilient, and remarkably responsive when you give it the right signals. So here's what I want you to do. Tonight, brush thoroughly, floss, and rinse with antimicrobial mouthwash for 30 seconds. Simple, free, backed by research, starts protecting your lungs tonight. Tomorrow at breakfast, chin tuck with your first drink. Small, gentle, deliberate. This week, try your first set of effortful swallows. 10 reps, 3 minutes. Build it into your morning. Then come back and tell me in the comments. Have you been clearing your throat after meals? Has anyone noticed changes in how you eat or swallow? Your experience might be exactly what someone else watching this today needs to hear. And if this video gave you something real, share it. Send it to a spouse, a sibling, a friend over 60 who's been brushing off that recurring chest congestion for years. Because the person who most needs this information is probably not going to search for it on their own. You might be the reason they find it. Next time, I'm going to show you the one common. Kitchen habit researchers have linked to reduced aspiration risk in seniors over 60. Nothing to do with what you eat, everything to do with how. You will not want to miss that. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice and does not replace the guidance of your personal physician or healthcare team. Always consult your doctor before making changes related to any health condition, especially if you are managing respiratory or swallowing concerns. I'm Dr. Derek. Take care of yourselves. Your lungs are worth protecting. And now, you have the tools to start.